Hey, welcome back to the mission, the fiction mission. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a very powerful and useful technique I call the in history versus in the story technique. And it's a communication technique that I think is very helpful. I use it quite a bit to help express my views and help understand what other people are trying to say or what their view is. Now, the basis of this lesson is the idea that really, when you say something happened in the gospel or in the gospels, even worse, it's always very ambiguous to say that something happened in the gospel or in the Gospel of John this happened or Gospel of whatever. It's ambiguous. Why? Because it's not clear whether you think that it happened in history. And this technique is useful when discussing the historicity of certain New Testament events, especially the events recorded in the Gospels. So, yeah, if you're interested in speaking clearly about what you believe happened in history versus what is simply recorded in the Gospels or as a part of the story, listen on. So let me start with a sort of innocent example, which I'm thinking of the idea that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey or a colt. So, for example, I'm going to avoid saying in the Gospel of Mark he rode in on a colt. It's much better if we're talking about historicity to say in history, I think Jesus rode in on a colt. And if I don't think that, it's what I would say is something like in the story, Jesus rides in on a colt. So you see, the distinction is whether I think it happened in history or whether I think it happened simply in the story. And when I say in the story, it's the default is that I don't really think that happened in history. Otherwise, I would say it happened in history. Okay, so moving on to another example is the baptismal scene at the beginning of each, not the beginning, but in each synoptic gospel, there's a baptismal scene, or Jesus comes down to the Sea of Galilee and meets with John the Baptist. Now, in Mark, he does get baptized. In Luke and Matthew, he does not get baptized. So the question becomes historically, what do I think happened? If if I think Jesus was actually baptized by John the Baptist, in history, I'm going to say in history, I think John the Baptist baptized Jesus, even though in the other Gospels he does not. So if I think it's just something that happened in the story, I'm going to say in the story, or in the story of Mark, Jesus gets baptized by Mark. But if I don't think that happened in history, um, I'm not going to say obviously I'm not going to say in history he was baptized. I'm going to say in the story he was baptized, but I don't think in history he is baptized because perhaps in Matthew and Luke he's not baptized. So in the story of Matthew, I might say Jesus went down historically. In history, he went down and met with John the Baptist, but in history, he was not baptized. And that's in contrast to saying in the story of Matthew, he went down to meet John the Baptist. And of course, in the story, he was not baptized, but he goes down there and he receives the Holy Spirit in the story. Now, if you think in history, God's Spirit came down in a real way and entered Jesus, then you would say in history, the Holy Spirit came down upon Jesus at that baptismal scene. Okay, so you see the importance. It's really quite important just to say whether or not you think something happened in history or if it's just an element of the story or a part of the narrative. It's part because very often you may want to talk about something that you don't think is historical, but it's important, for example, to the development of the church or the development of theology. You may want to discuss the scene at with John the Baptist, but um, most importantly, to discuss the descension of the Spirit um, upon Jesus. And that, of course, has theological implications. And you may want to discuss that even though you don't think it happened, or even though in history you don't think that Jesus was baptized, or you may not even think in history that Jesus went down and even met with John the Baptist. Although, of course, he meets John the Baptist in each of the synoptics. So, one other example is, for example, the crucifixion. If you think, as most people do, that Jesus was crucified in history, you would say in history, I think Jesus was crucified, or in history, this happened. But if you think that Jesus was not even crucified, if you're like a total mythicist and you think there was no Jesus, there was no actual crucifixion, then you would say in the story Jesus gets crucified, but in history he was not crucified. Now it's a very rare position to hold, but if you want to be clear about that, that's just a technique to make your position more clear. And finally, when we get to the resurrection, or let's say post-resurrection appearances, um, now, of course, in Mark, there are no post-resurrection appearances. So you'd say in the story of Mark, there are no post-resurrection appearances. But in history, I believe that people, or you may say in history that I believe people, historically, real people reported that they saw the risen Jesus. If you believe that, you would say in history, I believe, number one, that Jesus was resurrected and that he had a physical body and people could see him. Now, if you don't believe that, you might say, yeah, in the story, he appears to people, of course, in the story. But in history, that never happened. I don't believe in history that, for example, Jesus appeared to real people in history. Okay? So that's the essence of this video. It's, as I said, it's a communication tool to make your position more clear. And you could also ask whomever you're talking to, what if they mean in history, you think this happened in history, versus you think this simply happened in the story or was part of the narrative but didn't happen. It's a helpful question very often to help understand what other people are saying, because as I said earlier, just saying that something happened in the gospel, it's quite ambiguous when you're talking about historicity of certain elements. And so this is I think, a useful technique that anybody could use for whatever your view is on the historicity of any particular subject in the gospel narrative. It's a useful technique and it's a useful question to ask to express yourself and to actually understand what other people are trying to communicate, or what their actual beliefs are. All right, so thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and all that stuff. Leave a comment. I'll be happy to respond. And thanks for watching.